Well, hello and welcome to Ask an Apologist. My name is Matthew Middleberg, and I'm joined here by Brandon McGuire, Megan Allman, and Mike Sherrard. And we are all here to answer your questions about horror, haunts, and Halloween. Is it healthy? And to discuss these issues of should we celebrate this holiday? Should we watch horror movies? All of these kinds of questions. And most of all, we're here to answer your questions. And so, this is a discussion, it's a conversation, and we want you to be a part of it. So feel free to, at any point during the conversation, to submit your questions, whether you are on our YouTube channel or whether you're on Twitter or whether you're on Facebook. Please feel free to put those in the comments, and we will do our best to respond and to engage with these topics. And this is also Brandon McGuire's first time joining us. He is from the YouTube channel Daily Dose of Wisdom. And so, Brandon, do you have anything you want to say just as you're joining us for the first time?
Happy to be here. Love these two guys. Different histories going back. Just met Megan, but she seems really great. And this is my second ever live stream, so everybody bear with me if it's clunky and funky along the way, but really happy to be here.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, let me just begin this conversation just with kind of an opening statement, an opening kind of salvo, if you will, to kind of set the tone of what we want to do here tonight. Because I realize that this topic of Halloween and horror and all of this can be a controversial one. It can be one that Christians are have different opinions on, that even non-Christians have strong opinions on, and it can sometimes generate more heat than light in our conversations. And so I want to encourage us as we do our best to talk about these things, as we are processing and thinking out loud through these issues, just to, if you are somebody who is convinced that all of these things are just 100% wrong and we should partake in none of them, to give some charity to Christians who might think that some of it is okay or certain elements of it are okay, and also not to fear that Christians could, for example, lose their salvation over trick or treating or something like that. Romans 8 says, what can separate us from the love of God, and it goes through quite an exhaustive list of elements of things that we might assume might be powerful enough to separate us from God's love, and the conclusion is nothing can separate us from God's love. And so if you are convinced that it's wrong, that's fine, and it's totally your prerogative to try to convince others the same. But just to say, give some grace to those who think otherwise. And then on the flip side, if you're somebody who just thinks, hey, there's nothing wrong with this, I can do anything and everything, and there's no consequences to any of my actions, and there's no possible truth to any of the concerns of those who are concerned with Halloween, I would just urge to maybe give some consideration and to give some make sure that you're actually listening to people who have experienced maybe some dark things and or have a dark past, and are warning and cautioning against these things, and to essentially be for all of us to be charitable, to come to a thoughtful conclusion, and to walk in wisdom in all things, always, but especially on such a controversial issue. Do you guys have anything to add to that?
I I love it. We need to be people of grace and truth. That should be our posture in life. Hopefully, we'll maintain that posture here. I don't know fully where you all three stand on what we're going to talk about tonight. So there may even be some disagreement here, and hopefully, we can model that kind of grace and truth commitment that you just presented. So I'm looking forward tonight. This is going to be a lot of fun. Hopefully, those watching have some fun questions or stories to share. Just really looking forward to hanging out with you all and talking about this tonight.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, just to kick off the discussion, I know the order of the title started with horror and then it went to haunts, but I think we should start with Halloween just because it's the season, it's what we're in right now, and I think it's sort of what people are thinking about, and probably why most of you have tuned in tonight is to think about the issue of Halloween and should we celebrate it, should we not? And there's a huge range of kind of questions that we could ask related to this topic, and we'll go into those as best as we can. And again, remember, if you have a specific question you'd like us to address, please go ahead and put that in the comments. But as we begin, I've heard sort of the objection that some people have raised against Halloween, that we ought not celebrate it because it has pagan roots. And so maybe I'll just offer some thoughts on this, and then you guys can contribute as well. But um, I'm not sure whether it has pagan roots. You know, I've done a little bit of research. It's not my area of expertise, but I've done some research listening to different apologists and different philosophers who have addressed this issue. And some of them have said, yes, this, it has sort of these came from these pagan rituals, and was a day to celebrate the dead and all sorts of different things. But then I've also heard others who have said, you know what, a lot of that has been debunked by good history and good kind of looking into the texts, and there's a lot of rumors that spread around the origins of this holiday, and so. Um, it's a little bit unclear, kind of the development of this, and I think there are probably elements that are borrowed from even Christian elements or cultural elements, or all of these different things. But I guess I wonder if something having pagan roots necessarily means that it's wrong for us to partake in it. In the same way that I think you can look at different musical instruments or different celebrations that we have, and question, this was started by a non-Christian, or this was started by a selfish person, or this was started for a purpose that I don't like, but is that what it's being used for now? um, and I don't think that I think that's almost a version of the genetic fallacy, that just because it has roots that we don't agree with, is that what the thing is now? And it's sort of like, how do we use it is the bigger question, rather than where did it come from. But I'm open to being, convinced otherwise. So what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I don't know that it's an easy answer. I don't know that it's like a yes no kind of black and white simple answer, which I know we all love. Nuance is like the word of the year, especially in political seasons and whatnot. But the pagan origin of Halloween is maybe somewhat questionable. It's interesting. Most cultures throughout in history have had a Day of the Dead
Mhm.
celebration, and there are a number of historians that would trace Halloween back to the Celts. 2,000 years or so ago, and a festival called Samhain, if I'm pronouncing that right. And it was the end of the harvest season, the beginning of winter. And they believed that at this time of the year, the barrier between the supernatural realm and the physical, the material world was at its weakest. And so souls could get lost. And so some of these practices began to emerge, like disguising yourself in costumes. And so maybe that's some of the stuff that's somewhat questionable. There does seem to be not a ton of certainty on the history going back that far. But then the Catholics kind of Christianized this and turned November 1st into All Saints Day. The word Halloween comes from All Hallows Eve, which kind of began the Christianizing of this Day of the Dead pagan festival, and turned it into a day to remember those that were martyred. So, how much into our time do these traditions affect us? I think there was somewhere around the turn of the 20th century where some of these Halloween traditions migrated into the United States. And so that question, right? What we practice now on, October 31st, where people dress up in costumes and go around and get candy. How much of this tradition is connected even to the Catholic tradition of All Saints Day, or something that goes even further back to this Samhain, or to any other culture's Day of the Dead? That's it's hard to trace all of that. But then to your question though, Matthew, if it does, what does that mean? And I think what I want to say, and before I go too long, hear what you all have to offer, is it depends. And it depends mostly on your environment, your culture, both from a broader standpoint, but then even very narrow and specific to those people that you are most closely living around. So I think I want to just say it depends. And then before I unpack that and get too long winded, hear what you all have to say, if anything that I just said made any sense at all.
Yeah, I agree that it depends. I will say that October 31st at my house is a celebration of my husband's birthday. So he grew up with the firm belief that people dressed up in celebration of him. So he may or may not still believe that. But I don't know that there's anything inherently wrong with the idea of wearing a costume and getting candy, right? But the historical origins are something we should think about and come to thoughtful conclusions. And even the trick or treating, I think, came along after, of course, the All Saints Day and All Hallows Eve, which was the night before the All Saints Day. But the idea of the clash between the classes, right? The poor would kind of go to the houses of the rich, if I understand it correctly, historically, and ask for treats, ask for food or something, or the threat of a trick was threatened there, some kind of prank or some kind of damage they might do to the home or something like that. So even that has its own little history that we've now taken as more, no, just give me candy. So the meaning matters of what we're doing when we do it, when we practice these types of things, if we choose to.
Yeah. I'll just say too, I think I'm not saying that just because um, I'm not saying, a genetic fallacy, therefore we ought not to be concerned, right? If it does have pagan origins, which you brought up Samhain, and I've heard different historians try to debunk that idea that there is a connection between that and Halloween. But even if, let's say, there is some sort of connection, I do think that should give us some pause to say, okay, well, hold on. If this has pagan origins, what elements of those pagan origins still remain today, right? And it's the same thing that I would say about, for example, to not to step into another incredibly controversial issue amongst Christians, but the Enneagram. I think the Enneagram has some problems because it has sort of dark spiritual origins, and it doesn't seem to have changed much from that time that it had those origins. So, there's sort of a thing to say. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be cautious because of that. I think it is right to be cautious and to say, okay, this should at least cause us to examine and to think about these things deeply, if you're convinced that it does have pagan origins.
Have y'all heard about those Christian group circles that are combining Enneagram services and Halloween?
No, really?
No, I'm totally making that up.
Oh, okay.
Checked out to me. I was like, sounds right.
Sounds about right. Someone watching is like, I just got a Facebook invite to something like that.
Yeah,
so exactly. What do you think, Brandon? This big idea of if something has a pagan origin, it's automatically out of bounds or off limits, or what's your initial thoughts on that before and I know we're apologists, so we take forever to answer a question. We're like Jordan Peterson here. Maybe at the end of the hour and a half, we'll get to a coherent, simple answer. But what are your initial thoughts on this?
Yeah. So I think that the idea that what we celebrate today is like a patchwork quilt is definitely true. It's not a single line pointing back to a single history, but it is definitely amalgamation of different cultural practices and different threads of history kind of coming together. That's for sure true. And I feel as well that the conversation that we're having is also like a patchwork quilt, that we're slowly unfolding the full picture. And so I just want to add a couple of things, not in disagreement, but around what you guys have said. With what you were saying, Michael, I think one other relevant detail, or going back to like Samhain, is that day was when the darkness took over in the calendar year and the days began to get shorter. And that doesn't mean that it's all evil, but that's one of the relevant points to that. Was from this day forward, it's scarier because the days are getting shorter, the darkness is here, and so they would build these massive bonfires to ward off evil spirits, which I just think is like, just a little like something there to build around. And then to kind of fill in the gap of the history, so you guys hit on the Celtic part and / question mark maybe, Matthew, and then the Catholic Church coming in that. But I can speak to the how did it come to America piece before the vandalism and that what you were talking about, Megan, and that would be in 1840. And I can speak to this as an Irishman. It would be the potato famine. And so it was the potato famine that drove this mass migration of Celtic people to the Americas. And to your point, Megan, because they were poor, then you have some of I mean, really, that is true, though. That's where, I mean, there's whole movies about the Irish in New York and all of this. And so, yeah, vandalism was a critical piece of the American version of the trick or treat game. It was kind of like a deal. It was like, if you don't give us something, you're going to get a little treat or a little trick. Sorry, where you're going to get a trick or we're going to get a treat. And it was actually, some of those examples are even a bit more violent and stuff like that. Not just like, haha, we spray painted your fence, but actually bad. So this is my argument that just to stir up some controversy here. If I had, well, it wouldn't be a magic wand in this case. If I had a Christian instrument to accomplish my purpose, I would erase Halloween. Not because I think it's all bad, not because I think that there's a goblin under every, whatever, but because I think that the negatives dramatically outweigh the positives, in my opinion. And the reason that I say that is because not even just the genetic fallacy argument, it came from a bad source, therefore it's a bad thing, but at almost more of a symbolic level. I feel that it is even what we do today is very odd if you really think about it. It has to do with it's a carnival. You put on a mask, you hide your identity, you kind of get away with nefarious behavior. It's like it's like a little gasket where you kind of let your flesh eke out. The women dress more sexualized. You dress up like this, this murderous, crazy character. And I feel like just that idea of like the role that carnival has played in culture, that itch is being scratched by the American version of Halloween, in my opinion. So that would be my first thing. Then the second thing is that I think that, again, sort of at a symbolic, metaphorical level, it's weird. You open, so your house is like your fortress, and the door is like a portal to the exterior world. And you open your door to monsters at the door, and you kind of make a sacrifice. Now, I know I sound crazy here, but symbolic. You make a type of an alm or an offering or some kind of a sacrifice to them in order for them not to do something to you. And again, I'm not saying therefore it's all totally bad. And by the way, I think that if it's like a little kid dressing up as a cowboy and an Indian and whatever, and they're, I'm not saying it's all bad, but I think at a symbolic level, both for the kind of carnival reason and just because there is some roots that go back to paganism and go back to, and then to what we were talking about off camera before we got started, like we still really do live in a real spiritual battle. It's not everything is just like consumerism, and it's it's a product, so it can't be evil. I'm not saying that every product that you buy at Target is charged with spiritual evil. But
so here's a question: is the version of Halloween that we have today, do you think it's prescriptive to those ends? Like the very structure of it, what's inherent to it are the things that you've talked about. Like it's not possible to partake of Halloween and succumb to the things that you just talked about. Like it makes you do these things, or is it just something like anything that is prone to corruption? Does my question make sense? Like it's a little bit like the very nature of Halloween. It's inescapable. It's instructive. It guides you to these kinds of practices, these kinds of behaviors. It directs you to open yourself up in this ways. And it's like it's unavoidable. Whereas it could just be something that is, I don't know, maybe makes it easier to do that instead of
I guess
inevitable. Does that question make sense?
It totally makes sense. I'll give my quick response and then I'll turn it over to you guys because I'm talking too much. My response would be that if you're doing something purposefully subversive, then it's awesome because it's not like the devil owns a day. Like, so if you're using that mechanism, for lack of a better word, of people coming to your door to meet your neighbors, build relationships with people in your neighborhood, or even like, the sort of 90s version, give them a gospel track, nothing against that. But, you could do that. And that would be like an intentional subversion of what the holiday is really about. And I think that would be awesome. But I think if you're just like defaulting into the normal cultural way of doing it, I'm not saying that you're like worshiping the devil or something, but I just don't see, I don't see a necessary upside to it other than the subversive things that you're talking about. And I see potential risk, especially like Megan maybe can talk about Manitou and stuff, when it's like, again, like we're in a real spiritual scenario still here, even though we're in the post-Enlightenment West, or we're having this conversation here. But like we really are in a world full of devils, is my point. And I'm not saying that means that Halloween is, but anyway, so I'll
well, what's interesting, and be careful about hogging this, the fact that we're in this post-Enlightenment, I think we are returning as a culture to a more spiritually minded time where something like Halloween could be more dangerous in the ways that you're describing than it has been previously here in the West, in this more true of this Enlightenment rationalized culture that doesn't believe in the other world or another realm. I think we're leaving that space and we're returning to something that would be more open to explicit pagan idol worshiping, looking for religious practices like Halloween, not just a party festival. So all this just to say Halloween needs to, I think at least one thing we agree on at this point is it needs to be something that is, if you're going to participate in it, you have to participate in it in a, you have to be aware of what you're doing. And if you're just falling into this cultural holiday, it actually could be quite dangerous. So I know, sorry, you said you talk too much. I talk too much too, Matthew. So we'll let these other two go.
No, that's good. I mean, keep it going, guys. We love this conversation. I mean, I would just say, I think I agree with you, Brandon, that on a large scale, if I could snap my fingers and get rid of the holiday as a whole, I think I would. Which I wouldn't say that about Christmas. I wouldn't say that about Easter, obviously. I think there are so many redeeming qualities about that, but I am, just personally, I'm not the kind of person that enjoys the scary, the horror type of things, and I think that there's a lot of negative that is involved with that. So I think we're probably all in the same. We are all on the same page in that there are elements of Halloween that ought not to be engaged in. Like you say, the sexualization of the way that a lot of women dress, and all of these kinds of things. So I do think, though, I have heard, in the research that I was doing for tonight, some people make the claim that, if you go trick or treating or something, you're giving your soul to Satan, or you're giving your household to Satan, or something like that. And to me, it just seems like you can't accidentally worship Satan. You can't accidentally.
No, and again, for the mindful follower of Jesus, there's an element of Halloween that's kind of like, what is it in Matthew 12, where Jesus is being accused of the only reason he can cast out demons is because he's doing it by the power of the prince of demons, Beelzebub. And Jesus, goes on to say, what a house divided against itself cannot stand. Basically, if Satan's fighting Satan in the spiritual warfare, that house is doomed to fail. But then Jesus makes this point of saying, no, I'm doing this because the strong man has entered his house and he's tied up everybody. Now I'm plundering his kingdom. So there's this element too of like, just this default position of if you're engaging in Halloween, you're worshiping Satan. No, there could be an element of, what, Satan? Your reign's over, bro. And we're mocking you here on this. We're acknowledging the reality of the spiritual realm, and we're also recognizing your defeat. And so there's an element, and maybe that's to your subversive point, Brandon, where Halloween can be like this fun, celebratory middle finger to Satan kind of event where you are mocking the one who does not have power over this earth. This kingdom is coming to an end. The kingdom of God is here, which is the big theme of Mark's gospel, where that story is recorded.
See, that's an interesting idea, and I'll keep this short because I really want to hear Megan's thoughts. But that idea is interesting to me, and it kind of connects to what you were saying, Matthew. And anyone correct me if I'm wrong here, but with Christmas, we know what the Christian version of the holiday is. With Easter, we know what the Christian version of the holiday is. Even with Thanksgiving, we kind of know what it's about. Or it's very easy to connect the dot between the pilgrim story and that with, the New Testament, like being thankful, taking a time where you appreciate and show thankfulness to God is easy to connect to Christianity. I don't know what the Christian version of Halloween is.
That's a good point.
And maybe to your point, Michael,
Dude,
maybe,
call me Mike. Don't you know me enough?
sorry.
I feel like I'm being
Okay.
reprimanded.
Only his
here.
mother calls him Michael.
Okay, sorry. I don't know. I typed in Michael on the lower third of the documentary, so now I have that in my
Well, I
brain.
had to do it for search engines and books. Michael C. Sherrard, because there's too many
It
other
sounds
Mike
good.
Sherrards. But my friends call me Mike, so you can keep
Okay,
calling me
so
Michael.
Mike.
I'll just know where we stand here.
Okay, all right. So Mike, your point was really interesting though about, and I think it raises a good question. Like if we, so there isn't, as far as I'm aware, there isn't really like a implicit or referential
Yeah.
Christian part of Halloween. Maybe we need one. Maybe we need to the point of subversive and to the point of like redeeming it. Maybe we need, and maybe that's what the Catholics were trying to do.
That is what
But
they try. All right. Yeah.
yeah, but it's
Well,
like,
and
but
that's where we get the name, though, right? Isn't it All Hallows Eve? Like it's All Saints Day. It's the eve of All Saints Day, and
Right,
what I'm
but
saying,
I guess
like,
Brandon's point is it's been completely appropriated by a secular culture and it's been sexualized, and to the degree that there are pagan ritualistic practices in it. Right, what's the good in this? Like, what's the Christian point of this holiday, which is clearly seen in
sure,
Easter and clearly seen in Christmas? If if there was a, if this is a holiday that has a religious significance to some degree, what is that from the Christian perspective? Does anybody know of it when they're
and what I'm
participating in it?
saying is just to close the loop on that thought, because I love what you were saying about like the like
Middle
um
finger to Satan.
taking back the ground that the enemy has taken. And I don't think the answer is like, let's all go and hide away from the world on this night and go do something totally different. But it's almost like, what is the culture thinking about and doing once a year on Halloween? And how can we, as people not of this world, we're not citizens of this world, we're from heaven and we're here for a little bit, and we're ambassadors for Christ. How can we intersect with this weird cultural practice where kids dress up as monsters? And how can we intersect with that in a way that's like redemptive and not just like,
Mm-hmm.
oh yeah, like I'm an American before I'm a Christian. I'm a citizen of America before I'm a citizen of heaven. So of course, my and you know, no shame on anybody who's ever done it before. I dressed up that way, but it's like as an adult now and as a guy with a newborn, I'm thinking about this practically, and I'm like, what am I going to have my kid do? And can it be something a little bit better than dressing up as like Freddy Krueger or whatever? So I don't.
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, I think that the word redemptive, what is redemptive about it, is a good place to come around to, right? Because if we're thinking like apologists, I think we have three options when it comes to any kind of cultural practice. Do we receive it wholesale, like with everything that comes with it, which is kind of the point of this whole conversation? Like we can't do that because there's too much that's been lopped on top of it that has to do with the celebration of things that ought not be celebrated. So do we reject it outright, which many have done? And again, in the spirit of being charitable, we trust their reasons for having done so. Or is there a way to redeem it such that, even Brandon, and you're pointing out the pagan roots of the holiday, the fires were set to ward off the darkness, which is inherently a Christian principle, as is the creation of culture itself. That is an inherently Christian thing, that human beings were put on the earth to subdue and to rule, right? To be able to take the untapped potential of this world and make good things out of it and beautiful things out of it. So how can you bring light to these celebrations if you choose to partake? Is there a way in which community or family can be brought together around the holiday? Is there a way that it can be practiced that I don't know, is glorifying or edifying in that way? And like the Catholic Church tried to do, the celebration of those who are, have gone on, Paul would say they've fallen asleep, right? Not that they've died, for the faith. That is something to be celebrated. They're still celebrating if we believe all of this is true. And I think that we do. So the idea there, as we come around it, is it received? Is it rejected? Or is there anything redeemable? And I think anything in culture has to be looked at that way. What is there about it? And even to this point of, the Bible uses light and dark as a theme throughout. Light is God's presence. The dark is where, the lack of God's presence. And that is warring even in John 1. The talk about the light has come, or he has come to be light and the world is not overcome him. I'm getting my words all mixed up now because you guys
This is
going
good.
on like that made my mind go a million different directions.
Well, no, that's a really that's rich right there. This idea that this time of the year the days are getting longer, the night is getting longer. The
Well,
night is getting longer. Sorry, I can't get it out right.
Your middle finger to Satan concept is there a way to celebrate such that we are light?
Well, but doesn't it seem like that though? And this has probably been true throughout all times. It just seems like the darkness is getting heavier and longer. So this notion of being light to push it back, and the hope we have in Christ and our role to play in any given society that feels like the darkness is encroaching and will forever take us over. I mean, this is a explicitly Christian theme that ought to be drawn out during times of Halloween and the bonfires that you're sitting around that are illuminating that night. And as neighborhoods are coming alive and neighbors are gathering together around these lights. Yeah. I mean, that's a beautiful Christian idea or image there.
Feasting is a beautiful Christian concept. But I mean, similarly with practices around Christmas and Easter, right? The Christmas tree has its origins and roots in something different. Saturnalia was what was practiced way back when. And it was actually the church trying to stop some of that by establishing Christian, like, let's celebrate Jesus's birth at this time, which did not go well in the beginning because Christians started partaking in the crazy partying that was happening around the celebration of Saturn, right? But it has over time had these redemptive qualities, things like Santa Claus, things like, the big works were what? Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol, and then The Night Before Christmas, which my dad read to me like every night for a year because it was my favorite book ever when I was a kid. But now the gift giving is something that we have redeemed, and it made sense in terms of celebrating Jesus being the gift that came to the world. Similar with Easter, like bunnies and eggs, that's all about fertility, you guys.
So there's, seems to me maybe, if Christians can get their act together here and have some sense about ourselves, there might be a really amazing opportunity here. Because again, I'm convinced that the West, the United States, at least in particular, is becoming more spiritual. So the opportunity for something like Halloween in that environment might be something special. Well, go ahead, Megan. What?
No, I'm just thinking because you guys were again, so much conversation happens. So my problem is my mind goes like a ping pong ball or like a pinball. You guys were talking about the post-Enlightenment West that we're in, very secular, science-driven culture. But it wasn't so different even in the 17th century when the Enlightenment first happened and the reaction to it happened. That's where the new spiritualist movement was really born in the years following that, as people are watching kind of this science-driven reality stripped of imagination, stripped of, the things that we're talking about here, beauty, and because beauty was relegated to the realm of the subjective, the unknowable. If we can't study it with science, then why do we care? And there was a reaction to that at that time as people watched individuals adopt this. If they believed it to be true, they were trying to adopt it courageously, but it was a hideous world, one that was driven by science. That's where we get the word space, right? Like not the heavens, space, meaningless, empty, right? We can explain all that with chemical reactions and molecules in motion and everything else. But people like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who was a father of the new spiritualist movement, I think he was just desperate to know that there was anything beyond the physical world, that he didn't care what came through the door as long as there was something more. And I wonder if people are on that threshold right now of going, this world is so hideous. I don't care what comes through as long as there's something. Now, the danger in that is that we foreknow that the spiritual realm is very real. And I had Dr. Kevin Lewis was a theology teacher of mine. I remember just acutely him saying, the power that we have in that realm to operate with any kind of like authority ourselves, it would be like playing a match of tennis, but our side of the court is completely underwater. That's about how effective we are. So it's dangerous. So to Brandon's points, I think that's why there's so much that has to be considered. And just as a final note, because Brandon mentioned it, Brandon and I both have spent time in Manitou Springs in Colorado, where I live now and where Brandon was from. And it is a hotbed of new spiritualist activity, Wiccan activity. There are at least 5, maybe more, active shops where you can buy spell books and herbs and all that you would need to start your Wiccan practice. So it's a dark place, spiritually speaking. And it's not a place where I would send my children trick-or-treating on Halloween. But in my town in Georgia, where I'm from, you know, I've lived close to Mike actually for years. I wouldn't hesitate to go trick-or-treating with them downtown because it was a family-oriented activity there. So anyway, lots of things to consider, not only in the larger realm of the history of it, but also your region, what is celebrated in your region, your own personal background. I have friends who have come out of Wiccan practice and things like that who are going, I don't want anything to do with it because that is not an area I want to step back into.
Yeah.
To that, do you think 1 Corinthians 8 has anything to draw from on that point? 1 Corinthians 8, of course, is that passage where Paul's talking about whether or not you should eat food sacrificed to idols. And Paul says, he says, we know that idols aren't real, or something of that kind. And what he means by that is this idol does not have the power that people are ascribing to it when they're worshiping it, thinking that it's now going to produce something good for them.
Mm-hmm.
He says, we know there is no God but one. So we know that this is a vain, empty practice that somebody's participating in. So that food that you're eating, it hasn't been corrupted. It hasn't been defiled. Moreover, Paul will make a comment that food isn't what defiles you spiritually in that sense anyways. It's we know that's not the case. But Paul then goes on to say, he references a brother's conscience. And so there's something wrapped up here in whether or not you should eat food sacrificed to idols. Paul says, yeah, it's fine because we know idols aren't real. They're not real in the way that people are, interacting with them. But if it causes someone else to stumble, I'll never eat meat again. Do you think there's a relevant application of Paul's instruction to the Corinthians there about food sacrifice to idols to what we're talking about tonight?
I think absolutely. I think it really ties into the discussion of how should we, back to what I was saying at the beginning, how should we treat others who disagree on this issue? Not to lambast them or to treat them as though they're not Christian just because they have a different opinion on this, but to actually say, you know what, I'm willing to, you know, even sacrifice some of my rights to make sure that I'm not unnecessarily offending you about this while acknowledging, he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. And so if you have the Holy Spirit within you, you have a different, like you said, Megan, on our own power, we have no power, but with the literal God in us, there is sort of a protection there that I think ought to be considered. But when it comes to this question of conscience too, I think also later in Romans, there's also this idea of whatever does not proceed from faith is sin. And so if somebody is convinced that eating this food is wrong or participating in whatever holiday is wrong, whatever you are convinced of, that's the way that you should live. If you are convinced that Halloween is wrong, don't let anyone convince you to participate in it, because that's essentially living in hypocrisy. That's why it's wrong, is you believe one thing and yet you do something else.
Hey,
So
clarify
that's
that. I agree with you, but clarify what you just said, contrasting it with this, my own personal truth. And if it's my truth, I should obey it. What's the distinction there between this issue of conscience and if it's not from proceeding from faith, that is a sin? How is that different from, well, dude, this is my truth and I got to be true to myself?
Yeah, great question. So this idea of, personal truths and, you have your truth, I have my truth. Well, actually, it's not really a good way of thinking about truth. Truth is whatever matches reality. It's an idea that matches reality. And so there can be truths that are about individuals, but they're not individual truths. So for example, for me, it would be, it would be a sin probably to, I'm trying to think of a good example, to not read. To just to declare, I'm just not going to read ever again. Why? Well, because I'm called to ministry. I'm called to think about issues, and so if I don't read, I'm not really doing my job well, and so therefore it's now I don't know if that's a good example because I think everybody should read, but let's say for example you're just you're called not to read, for example. You know, there can be truths about different things that are true about different individuals. To just give a less controversial example, maybe take it out of the moral realm and just into the factual realm. I have blonde hair is a truth about me. That is true, and it's not true about Brandon, for example. I can't quite tell. I think you got brown hair.
Yep.
It's a little tough to tell, but in the same way, the truth is there. The truth is just an idea that matches reality, and so when it comes to these personal convictions, though, the truth is you either have a conviction about something or you don't. And the question is, what is your conviction? What do you believe about an issue? And if you do something, hypocrisy is sort of defined as living not according to what you believe. It's living differently than what you believe. Um, and so that's why this is essentially wrong.
Can I add on top of that something that was helpful for me?
Yeah,
Um, and maybe this isn't 100% right, so you guys can always feel free to correct.
sure.
But the way I've thought about this is that the question of conscience only goes in one direction, meaning it's capable of taking something that is generally good and making it bad for the individual, but it's never capable of taking something that's
Ooh.
bad and making it good for the individual. So that's how basically objective truth plays in with the question of conscience, I
So
think.
good. Yeah, Brent, that was excellent because I was just thinking about the fact that Tripp was a pastor for 7 years at a church that had been planted in a bar. Now, the church was doing incredible work in the bar. It would meet on Sunday mornings. There was not bar activities happening on a Sunday morning, but for some people, that might have been enough of a hurdle, is just entering into a bar. If they came from a background of heavy drinking, they can't even enter into a bar environment without succumbing to wanting to partake into what normally would take place in that environment. Versus, I had no qualms about walking into that space where we were going to read the Bible aloud. So that would have been a matter of conscience. The bar in and of itself didn't hold any power over most people. It wasn't the place that was wrong. It was the individuals, really the background of sin bringing into this, that needed to go, I've got to check this a little bit. We talk about the same thing when we talk about dating. Like, there aren't rules for dating. With Tripp and I work with young people. For those who don't know, we work with a lot of young adults. And we get questions about, like, what are the rules for dating, biblical dating? And those look different depending on what individuals bring into the relationship. Those boundaries might look different. And we can't look at other relationships and go, oh, look, they're kissing, that's sinful, versus, well, they're only holding hands. They're not practicing the freedoms that they want to. All of that kind of stuff are matters of conscience. A lot of it depends on what you're bringing to it, because real world consequences of the choices we make and how it affects our souls and our being.
Yeah, I think a great example of this is going. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just gonna say I think that's a nice work. I I was just gonna say I think that's a helpful example. And if there is a practice that you are partaking of that's causing something good to be partaken of as bad in some way, it's going to be in different ways. You ought not do that. But right, it doesn't go in the other way when we're talking about this element here of causing someone to violate their conscience. We're not saying, oh, if I feel that this kind of sexual immorality is good, well, then for that person it is good.
Yeah.
No, it would be like if you're taking some practice like like the gathering and feasting together, which is good, and you're eating meat that it's not been corrupted by an idol because they're not real. Yet there's something about this practice that is taking table fellowship and turning it into some kind of nightmarish stumbling block for those that are coming out of a deeply pagan, idolatrous practice. Yeah, don't eat meat and force them to violate their conscience because they can't wrap their head around how this could be good. And you're forcing them to partake of something that's violating their conscience in that sense. I think that's a helpful way to think about this passage and then apply it for something like Halloween.
Yeah, I think that it's important to just state clearly that there are some things that are irredeemable. There's some things like you can't do divination Christianly. It's just it's
Wait,
you know what I'm saying?
Saul didn't do that with the witch, can't get the word out, witch at Endor, or the
Yeah.
Sound like
medium
Monty
at
Python.
Endor.
Let's go there. What is that? You brought that up off camera. So what exactly happens there? Remind me. Does he do divination?
Yeah.
He goes to the Witch of
he
Endor,
could and had to get past all the Ewoks first. And
there it is. I love it.
there it is.
There we go.
Star Wars reference.
Okay.
Yes.
Return of the Jedi. Sorry. Okay. Back to the Bible. There's no, well, as far as I know, there's no connection between those two names, that the forest moon was named after that because of the story in the Bible. Anyways, Saul, we probably should just read it because I don't remember all the details here. But Saul goes to consult a medium. He wants to get in touch with Samuel, who's dead. And as the story is told, it works. And that Saul has a conversation with what he thinks at least is Samuel. And in the Bible, divination, necromancy, communicating with the dead or through mediums is explicitly forbidden. So this just raises an interesting question that I wanted to get at. And I think maybe I interrupted you here.
No, I guess I would just ask.
But are
Yeah,
these
go ahead.
things real? Like, what do we think about that? Like here we're talking about some things are irredeemable and the inherent pagan nature to Halloween. Well, what's analogous here, right? Where Paul is saying, we know that idols aren't real in that sense. Well, is divination real? Or is it something like, well, we know it's not real? I mean, it's just, is it really possible to communicate with the dead through a medium of some sorts? The Bible explicitly condemns it, which is interesting why it would condemn it if it's not possible or real. What do we think? And even broadening that to like this time of year, do we think this is the time of the year where the barrier between the spiritual realm and ours is weaker? What do we think about ghosts and angels and
Whoa,
demons
too many questions.
and
Too many questions.
all of that kind of, I want to get into this. I know if people are watching, there's got to be some questions they're asking. I want to know what y'all think.
Megan already warned you that her brain is ping-ponging, and now you're hitting her with a lit.
Yeah. Yeah.
I liked Brandon's hand was like,
Stop.
Okay, so let me say this. Let me try to go through it really fast. One, is it possible that the story there with the
Witch of Endor.
Saul, the Witch of Endor and Saul is a not an ought, and it's like it happened like polygamy happened, but we shouldn't do it. And like,
the Bible's clear that what Saul did was wrong.
Okay.
My
It was
question
his
is, did
downfall.
he actually talk to Samuel?
Oh,
That's my question.
So I would say probably yes, and I would even go a step further. And this kind of gets weird because now, but like the time that I spent in Africa really changed my perspective about some of this stuff, because generally I would totally agree, and I still do totally agree with what you're saying. Like idols aren't real thing. It's and even the Bible tells like that's made out of stone, that's made out of hay. That's you made it. Why are you worshiping it?
Right.
However, there are certain things that I think happen where the real spiritual realm recognizes the realm of imagination and basically idol worship. And so I'll give you one example. There was this is kind of I'll say this in the most PC way, or the most PG way possible. There was an idol that was shaped like a man, ready for bed, if you follow me.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Has
women
PJs on.
And the women would copulate with this idol, believing that they would be blessed with like different things. And from the perspective of the Christian pastor, that was actually a means through which people were demon possessed. People actually got impregnated with a demon through this idol act. So that's an example that I have in my mind where I'm like, that is super weird, first of all. And obviously the physical idol itself isn't a god, but the prince of the power of the air used the cultural sensibility about this whole thing and basically was like, great, if you're going to kind of like give your bodies to me in this manner, I can work with that. And according to the pastors, again, I mean, I only spent, 90 days there, but these pastors were very full of the Spirit and extremely legit men of God. So part of me is like, I'm kind of taking their word for it on some of this stuff, but that changed my perspective in the sense that it's like, man, and again, I'm not saying every jack-o'-lantern is actually, charged with a demon, but it was a weird thing where it's like, that's maybe the exception to the rule, but that's wild. You know what I mean?
Well, but scripture is clear that demon possession happened, right? Like Jesus is casting out demons from people, really, and they really are being demon possessed. So I think scripture, we shouldn't be surprised that can happen.
No, and I don't think, y'all tell me if I'm wrong, or I don't think scripture gives any indication as to how one becomes demon possessed. So what you're describing there, Brandon, it's certainly possible that that is a means. The Bible, I don't think, has anything that would tell us that no, you can't become demon possessed through these kind of worshipful practices. I don't think the Bible speaks to how one becomes demon possessed at all, but it is very clear that demon possession is real.
And I think to the point that someone made earlier, I don't think it happens by accident. I think that there's a active participation, sort of a giving of oneself in some capacity and opening up of oneself in some capacity to the spiritual realm that allows for that transaction, for lack of a better word, to take place. And then the other thing I was going to say while on Africa is and kind of to your whole point, I think, Megan, that I really appreciated your kind of pushing back on me about how there are certain desires embedded within even pagan cultures that are ultimately good desires, like pushing back the darkness with the fire of the light of a fire. And the way that culture basically, so I would say that in that case, like deeper than anything is God's actual, Christ is the light of the world. And that ultimately true thing ends up bleeding into even paganism, and then is actually, brought back to its proper source, maybe with the Catholic Church doing that. But like, do you know what I'm saying? Where pagans can basically get a lot of things right. They're just not attributing the right source for the idea that they have about, we don't like death, we don't like this and that. So, I mean, I think that's kind of what you were saying. It's like, I wouldn't say that it's good just because, I wouldn't say that something is inherently bad just because a pagan person did it. And I would even go further and say beneath the wrong practice might actually be a deeper desire for something that is actually ultimately sourced in God himself, if you kind of follow.
That was a beautiful summation of what I think I was trying to say and didn't get around to saying. So I think that's exactly what I was talking about. I'm wondering, there's a couple things I want to say, because I know we're listening as we're thinking about these things. I know that number one, those who study the scriptures and understand, because I think our understanding of what the Bible has to say about demonology, and the study of demons and of angels and the spiritual realm, should bring some comfort to us in terms of, to know what's going on and what authority Christ has in that realm means we should not fear. Not ultimately. I think we should fear dabbling or making a transaction, as Brandon said. There's something very enticing for those who feel very powerless to be tempted to give up some sort of authority or power in order to gain what it is they want, whether it's recognition or attention or beauty or whatever the thing is. But as Christians, Christ has ultimate authority in those realms. So we should not be afraid. At the same time, I'm wondering, as we are moving into a time, Mike, I think you've alluded a little bit to the fact that we're probably entering into a more pagan age, even in our post-Enlightenment culture, as people are seeking the spiritual more and more. I wonder if we will see more of what they see in Africa, Brandon, and in other places where the spiritual activity is more, I guess, obvious. We've done a fine job in the States of our own evil. And that's not funny, but I'm just trying to think, like, here's what I'm thinking about. A conversation that a friend of mine had with a former student who's in Africa, who had come to study in the States and went back to his home in order to teach Christianity, teach theology. And my friend asked him, why do you think you see so much in terms of demonic activity, or even spiritual healing and things like that, like prayers where people are healed right on the spot? Why do you think you see so much more of that? And his response to my friend was, oh, well, because you have 911.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So what we've done in our post-Enlightenment West is we live in such relative comfort, though I think that we feel a lot of the chaos that's maybe been there all along, but now it's more present to our realization, I guess, for lack of a better word. I'm wondering, as people begin to dabble more in that spiritual realm, seeking something that is probably coming from a desire, I think that might be in some ways, if it were rightly routed, we would see a much more positive result. But they're seeking something. I wonder what we will begin to see.
Yep.
Let me bring up this question that has been asked here. Is that Daily Dose of Wisdom? Yes, it is. We asked Mr. Wisdom himself to come join us to give us some of his wisdom.
If Mike is allowed to be Mike, then I'm allowed to not be that.
Fair enough. That's great. And this is good reminder to anyone who's listening. We want to interact with your questions, so feel free to ask your questions as we go through this conversation. We want to do our best, as well as we have a couple questions that were submitted in advance, and so we do want to get to those. Going back a little bit on the conversation, back to the redeeming, how do we redeem this holiday? How do we redeem this? I think we've already touched on some good elements of this opening up of spiritual topics, opening up of spiritual conversations. To say, you know what, why are you spooked out about Halloween? Or why is it, for example, let's say you have an atheist friend who's scared about some of these things, to say, but wait a second, I thought you were an atheist. I thought you don't believe in these things. And to sort of to open up conversation, I think that's one way of sort of redeeming this holiday, and using the holiday for Christ, which is good. My hesitation with that is that sometimes Christians tend to try to
Ruin everything.
Christianize holidays. I saw a T-shirt that was all Halloween themed, and it said, "Are you following Jesus?" And I just wanted to. I think I had an aneurysm when I read it. So, I think we need to resist the temptation to do that. While at the same time saying, I think I have seen some Christian celebrations.
Yeah, but to that, yeah. I actually think holidays are the perfect opportunity, because it's really hard to overly Christianize them like you do with film, right? Like, I just generally don't enjoy Christian films because they're like this overly spiritualized and whatnot. But with festivals, I think there's kind of this inherent religiosity about them. There's something in just inherent to a festival or a holiday that feels spiritual. So I think it's actually kind of hard to over Christianize it. And that's why I think something like Halloween is the perfect opportunity to reclaim and redeem these things. And for those that are now becoming open to spiritual ideas again, what better way than to demonstrate what is really real regarding the spiritual realm and the powers of darkness and demon possession, and who really is the strong man that's bound up the other and whose kingdom is prevailing. Halloween is an awesome opportunity. And I kind of think, though I know I'm curious to, like, in your mind, how could you make this a bad Christian movie kind of holiday, right?
Yeah.
Because to me, it almost seems like it's kind of hard to do. It's got some built-in mitigating factors just because it's a holiday, and it's supposed to be kind of over the top and explicit in some way. Whereas you don't want an over the top and explicit gospel call in a compelling story. It's like, well, that just doesn't fit. Why did you do that? You kind of ruined the story that I was already caught up in and understanding the nature of reality. And this was kind of already drawn me to God in a certain way. You just took me out of the story by that track moment right there. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what in your mind, Matthew,
I
how
I
you
think my
could do that.
hesitation is just when we take uh secular things and then we make a a cheesy Christian version of it. So instead of trick or treat, like tractor treat or something like that, or just
That's a
making it
good
very
example.
cheesy. But to say no, actually, I totally agree that there are ways of celebrating the holiday that that can be Christian. And like, for example, I know somebody who celebrates. It's also Reformation Day. And so I know somebody who watches the movie Luther every year, and they eat a diet of gummy worms on Halloween, and that's sort of a
So
way
you
of
got to
them,
explain that reference. Only nerds are going to laugh at that.
yeah, yeah, diet of worms. It's the trial where Luther says, here I stand. I can do no
Can do
other.
no other.
I stand on logic and the word of God. But yeah. So I think there are ways, and also I think ways of, and this is something I wanted to say earlier too. I don't think we need to necessarily do the Christianization of this in order for it to be a good thing. I actually think that just the celebration, just the best elements of this, if we can separate the evil parts and even just have the candy, that's a good thing, right? Like, I think,
So
like,
what would
just
that look like though? Like if you were to extract
yeah.
all of the damaged goods, what do you have left is my
I,
question.
I think you have some of the best of my childhood where you have trick or treating in a safe neighborhood where kids are not dressing up as, sexualized things or demonic possessions. They're dressing up like when I was a kid, I was a bucket of popcorn. That's hilarious. That's
Hey, you
great.
want to know who had the best costumes growing up? It was my
Yeah.
wife,
Oh yeah.
because my mother-in-law would inevitably just forget. And so the day of, she gets like just some makeup and draws black eyes and a white t-shirt that has the letter P on it. And she goes around town as a black-eyed P.
That's awesome. That's
Right.
There's like
great.
a number
So
of those examples for Terry.
yeah, well, and,
Well,
and I've heard of churches also, doing trunk or treats where it's like, look, you're still gonna do the costumes, you're still gonna do the candy, and we're still gonna have a celebration, and we're maybe there'll even be some explicitly Christian elements there where we're gonna talk about the gospel, talk about how God is still God today, even on this day where people are worshiping Satan or doing terrible things. So I'm not saying don't do those things. I'm just saying I think there are some good elements of the holiday that are not irredeemable.
There's also the point that I think that Christians, that's the funny thing about Christians, is whatever culture you go to, other than their love for one another, which you hope they're displaying, they're kind of harder to spot.
Hmm.
There's nothing outwardly
Sure.
obvious that makes us Christian, whereas there are some other religious practices where it's very obvious that somebody is part of that particular religion. And so there's that. But yeah, I can remember we would go to, I had friends who moved into a house in a part of town that was a little bit, what wasn't like the part of town that they wanted initially to live in, but they felt very called to the neighborhood. And they would hold a chili cook-off every year, and people would dress up and we would come and do the chili cook-off at their house. And it would be a fun party like it was a legitimate party. It wasn't one where people were getting wasted or things like that, but it was a lot of fun. And their presence in that neighborhood transformed the whole neighborhood. Like within about 3 years, there was a park built in the neighborhood, and their neighbors were kinder to one another. It was just kind of a cool thing. So that kind of participation around feasting, around dressing up that, wasn't over the top or whatever. People were just wise in the way they went about it. Or if they weren't, they came and whatever, they were accepted, like, hey, come on in. And then, I don't know, you just kind of learn in community with one another. Yeah.
So can I share a joke comment and then a serious comment?
Yes, please.
Okay, you guys know those tracks that look like money? So
That's
when
so
you
mean.
yes, you pick it up and you're like, oh man, and you're like, the framing of the gospel is already like you're pissed off.
Bait and
Right.
switch.
So imagine for Halloween, just in terms of how can we redeem this, like the T-shirt that says Reese's, and instead it says Jesus. Let's go a step further. actually make something that looks like candy. But when the kid opens it up, they have no candy.
Yes.
And instead they have paper and words in the KJV.
Yes.
That'll
Wonderful.
win their hearts.
Wonderful.
100%.
I love
No,
that.
like if you're going to, conscience allows, if you're going to pass out candy, then pass out the best candy. Come on.
I know. Not like huge track, one M&M. Okay, on a serious note, I'm reading this book right now, highly recommended, Justin Brierley's Surprising Rebirth.
Yes. Cool.
We're doing this in the Wisdom Society,
So
yada yada. But on page 33 of this book, he makes a commentary. It's 2 sentences, but that ties into part of the conversation that we were having around where is culture going? We're becoming more spiritual. What's coming next? How do we be ready for it? And I thought of this when you guys were saying that. And here's what he says. The church was caught on the back foot by new atheism and only latterly began to find its stride again. The danger is that as this cultural conversation moves forward, the church will once again be left answering yesterday's objections rather than engaging with those who are asking a different set of questions altogether. And that really hit me because I feel like a lot of times we can do that. It's like we're still fighting maybe even like a straw man of a 20-year-old argument that like mattered to us because that's when we were in our college years. But is that really the question that's being asked, right now? And it was a very convicting thought. And it kind of is like if we're always playing defense and if we're always like reacting against something that we felt impacted the people that we love and around us, but we're not laying out an affirmative vision that can plug into like the world as it is today, then I think we're always going to be one step behind if we're playing defense, basically.
So I think this is the perfect opportunity. And I see that question. It's the surprising rebirth of belief in God, right? That's the title of that book.
Yes.
Justin Brierley.
So this is a way, again, to be not flat-footed and maybe be a little bit ahead. If it is true, and I think it is true, and many people are observing this, non-Christians included. I just picked up another book. I'm totally blanking on it. All I've read is the introduction on it. It'll come back to me in a second, but not a Christian, but picking up on this movement. If people are starting to look for help from the spiritual realm to overcome the trials and the meaninglessness of this world, what better holiday than Halloween to draw out the truth that is Christ has overcome the dominion of darkness. And he has transferred us from that realm of darkness into his marvelous light. He is the strong man that has gone into the enemy's house and bound him, as it says again in Mark, and is now plundering his house. Jesus is the Lord over this realm, and we ought not to fear that realm. And we can look to help from that realm, if you will, but it's through Jesus Christ. So there's a great opportunity here to not just be on the defensive, but positive, from the positive culture making standpoint of doing something good through this holiday and having it be more explicit and drawing out these truths that this realm does exist. You need not fear it. Jesus has conquered it, and there's hope here now for those of us.
Amen. Dude, that is so good. That is so good because that reminds me. Okay, so like, do you guys know Jonathan Pajot? I don't agree with all his theology, but he was talking about sort of like the symbolic world of Halloween, and he's like kind of talking about that idea of carnival and stuff. And he was talking about how originally jack-o'-lanterns were basically the same concept as a gargoyle. You make something that looks scary and basically demonic in order to fight off the scary and the demonic. But ultimately, beneath that aspiration is that you're afraid and you don't want the real bad thing to get to your house. So you make something that's like, we have scary things too. Get out of here. And you ward it off, right? But to your point, that's so good because it's like, is what is beneath our obsession with death and fear and the way that it manifests during Halloween, in the way that we sort of like play act it and glamorize it and make believe it, is all of that a way of holding our real fears at arm's length? And the same way that the jack-o'-lantern is a prop to hold off the real devil that you fear entering your house, is the entire carnival of Halloween a type of make-believe cloaking the real raw fear of death and fear of fear itself that is, I think, at the core of all people. So that, to your point, Mike, like there comes Jesus, the actual real burning, to go back to the pagan original root, the real light that casts out darkness, the light of the world.
Yeah.
So that's
so
really
good.
cool. That's really cool.
I do think that our culture worships death in a weird roundabout way, Brandon, because it is in the avoidance of it, like the fear of it, of we're going to hide it away. I mean, even little things like the fact that when a relative passes away, it's no longer in the home where they would stay for, people to come and see or visit or whatever that happened. That wasn't all that long ago, and that was a normal practice. Now it's like whisked away. Nobody sees. I mean, even in the realm where I spend a lot of time, which is talking and thinking about pro-life issues, we don't see abortion in our culture. Nobody wants to see it or show it or the results of it. It's hidden away. So I think it's an odd kind of thing. It's like a culture of death that masks as a culture of life. Like, you know what I mean? But both of you were talking about that book by Justin Brierley, the Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God. Thank you, Missy, for posting the link so people could go and get it. Is kind of all about the fact that these pagan practices of old created cultures that were horrific, like brutal even. And it's the realization of that in comparison to the West, we'll say, even with its imperfections now, but with the underlying understanding of an imago Dei bedrock, like that people have an inherent dignity and ought not be treated in a certain way. It's the realization that many people hold to that bedrock, that foundation, and believe what they're seeing in other places around the world that are steeped in pagan practices where death is celebrated. Like it's horrific, as it should be. And that's bringing people back to Christianity. And that's what Justin's talking about, both through his podcast and his book. But like intellectuals, creatives, they're all kind of coming back, if not fully coming back into the fold and accepting Jesus as Lord and Savior, then at least to reinvestigate it again. So to Mike's point, what an opportunity.
Right. And at Easter, you do approach, you do deal with death, but it tends to have the Christian themes of rebirth and life. That becomes the focus, resurrection, of course. And that's perfectly fine, and it should be celebrated like that. But there's not what's the Christian festival where you kind of look at the sorrow part of death and the horror, the fear element of it. You don't focus so much on that during Easter, and Halloween's an opportunity to do that. Kind of death, where is your sting? And what's more present in something like Halloween is recognizing the power of darkness that exists in this world, but the deliverance that we have in Jesus Christ and him being this strong man. Again, in Mark, it's the way you would deal with death at Easter and the way you would deal with death at Halloween is similar, but also with kind of different shades, if you will. Going back to that joke from earlier there, Brandon, before we got on. So yeah, I just think there's an opportunity here in Halloween for just what is true and the truth of the gospel and Christianity and the goodness that it brings can come about through this holiday.
That's great.
So are demons real? My question earlier in ghosts and angels. Are we ever going to answer that question of mine?
What did you say, Brandon?
No, I was just trying to get a gauge for our landing point to gauge, because like there's so many different trails that are sparking out. Kind of to your point, Megan. But when are we trying to land the plane on this one?
Well, Mike wants to land a plane on whether or not demons are real.
Okay,
and if you've seen a ghost, did Saul actually summon Samuel? I really want to know.
I kind of think he did, just because he explicitly says, I think, what Samuel would say in that situation, which is like, Saul, what are you doing? Like, this is forbidden. Like, you don't, you know what you've just done.
Truth.
Yeah.
But then it was the very real Israel's army will fall. to the
Yeah.
because
True
of
prophecy.
this activity.
True prophecy. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm convinced that there is an intermediate state of the soul that, we're not, there's not some sort of soul sleep where we're just totally unconscious after death. It seems like there's a lot of scriptural evidence for that. Like Paul is like, I would rather go and be with Christ right now. So it seems like there's this intermediate state, and it seems like it's at least possible that you could be temporarily recalled from that in a state, and if you're like Samuel, you're going to be pretty mad about it because it's not
What are you
what you're
doing?
supposed to
Why
do.
did you
Yeah,
bring me here?
yeah,
Gosh.
yeah.
And even that, that's the whole story is crazy.
And it doesn't seem like he's in danger or he's like in some sort of state of distress. I don't think Christians should fear that at all. But yeah, it does seem like there is some sort of possibility of intermediate state existence.
The disciples thought they saw a ghost when it was Jesus, which you don't use that as a proof text for the like what is a ghost or the existence of ghosts, but at least it
Sure.
was in their head that such a thing existed, such that when they saw Jesus, they went, "That's a ghost." So whatever their conception was, existed at that time. What do we think? I mean, you made a fine point, Brandon. Where's our landing spot? Just because I want to see what you all think about all these questions doesn't mean we have to spend the rest of our time asking and talking about this kind of stuff.
You know what is kind of funny about that, though, is I feel like from a Christian perspective, we're asking that question with a certain subtext that's totally different from the way that a non-Christian or like it's weird that people are like kind of to the point that was being made a little bit earlier. People are very open to the spiritual as long as it's not like the religiously spiritual. So like I think that a lot of people in culture are pretty open to. Yeah, I think maybe one time my grandpa was in my bathroom because the mirror opened or something like that. And that type of idea is more friendly for whatever reason in the culture. Or, I mean, to put it really bluntly, people are more likely, just your average non-Christianized person, more likely to pick up a Ouija board and play around with it with a couple of drinks on a Friday night than they are to seriously pray to try to contact God. Like, let's really pray. And see if we can get breakthrough. You know what I'm saying? But people are like, let's actually really see if we can get some kind of contact on this Ouija board. So there's a weird double standard there where there's an openness to ghosts from a secular perspective is what I'm trying to say. But for us as Christians, we're like, so how does this play out theologically? Like, are they like,
but those are our stories. Right? Storytellers drive the culture. We believe that 100%. And the stories surrounding the afterlife in our culture are filled with kind of this caricatured idea of ghosts, of your loved ones just come back and sit with you, or they're walking around, with teaching you about your new girlfriends or whatever. Like, I don't know. There's all of that. So these are the stories that we read. And I think you're right to your point, Brandon, with people spent more time in the scriptures, they would know that both angels and demons are very real. I think that there are too many things that happened in stories that I know of where they have been present to deny that. So both from the scriptural source, but also from the experience source, that kind of stuff is real. And like I said earlier, that realm is there. Our control in that realm is pretty much nil, but Christ's control in that realm is ultimate. So, yeah.
This also kind of ties into the whole thing, the whole use of substance to access a different reality conversation.
That's really growing.
It's really growing.
Yeah.
And it's another one of those weird data points where I think it's ultimately a backdoor validation of the biblical worldview in the weirdest possible way. But it's like, yeah, the fact that you guys both took the same substance, let's call it DMT, and you both had the same hallucination without sharing notes, you experienced the same entity manifesting the same way without sharing notes. How do you explain that unless a veil is actually being lifted and you're seeing something that's real, not just your mind playing tricks on you? Like, how? And there's examples of that where there's been groups of people, like over 50 people, and these guided shamanistic tours of the Mayan ruins where you're standing on the ground beneath you is, feet deep of dead men's bones crushed into the ground that you're standing on from all of the human sacrifice. And you're standing in this thin space, to use a Celtic phrase, and you're all guided by the shaman, and you all take the drug, and you see the same thing. This has been documented a ton of times. To me, I'm like, well, that's horrifying, bizarre, but also a signpost to something. I think it's kind of in the same way that Halloween. It's like, how do we talk about Halloween and point people towards the bright side? I think this whole DMT mushroom thing is another example of that, where it's like, that's really weird. I wonder if that is like a portal, not just a misfire of chemicals in your brain. To me, that's a better explanation of a shared hallucinogenic experience.
So and to be clear on, like, what does the Bible say about this? I think the nature of reality is that it consists of the spiritual and the material. That's what is ultimately real. It's not purely material, or the new spiritualists say that ultimate reality is only spiritual, and the material world's the illusion. Christianity says no, the spiritual and the material both exist. The Bible's also very clear that we ought not try to seek out control over the spiritual realm and use it for material gain through things like divination, or so much of idolatry is that, right? It's the worship of these things so that you are fertile, or your crops. And I'm really suspecting we're going to see more and more of that practice here in the West, a seeking out of the spiritual realm for help in this material realm. And the Bible is very clear about that there is one Lord over all things, and it is Jesus Christ. And in him are we to seek deliverance from that which oppresses us here and now. And he is the only one worthy of our worship and our praise. So yeah, I think that's the nature of reality, is there is the spiritual, there is the material. The Bible makes it clear that there are ways to engage in the spiritual realm. It's not perspicuous. It's not perfectly clear. So there's a lot of mystery here to me, like through these practices. What is their efficacy? Do they really work? There's a lot of unknowns there, but I think what is true, a biblical worldview, I think contains the reality of the spiritual and the physical material. And to some degree, you interact with that spiritual realm and can do so in improper, sinful ways.
Yeah, and the Christian worldview would also point out that Jesus's presence, God's presence, is all around us, and that we have his attention all the time. Unlike the pagan practices of the ancient Near East, where they would go into temples and try to gain the attention of a certain god in order to hopefully get what they wanted through sacrificial exercises. I think that sometimes the mistake is that that's bled into the church too, where we try to access God in particular ritualistic ways. That's more new spiritualism than it is the realization that he is God of all, that he is present with us all the time, and that because he has granted us the status of image bearer, we have access to ask him all the time, or to seek his authority, or to seek his wisdom. Of course, we have our Bibles too, which he gave us for that purpose, but that's important to remember.
Yeah, and I want to be really clear, because I saw at one point a look of consternation flash across your face when I was talking about that. I want to be really clear. Like, I am not saying that the use of pharmakeia is a good way to access the spiritual realm. I'm just saying that I think people do it and then they go, oops, this is actually horrifying.
I think your point was taken.
Okay.
I'm
just saying it's one of those things where it's like, you might get more than you bargained for if you go.
Right. I think that I'm really open to this idea that there are ways to interact with the spiritual realm, whether they are demons, ghosts, and if we're going to define the word ghost, we mean a disembodied soul, like Samuel being recalled from this intermediate. I can't get. Thank you, Elmer Fudd moment there. It seems like ghosts in that sense are. I don't know if I want to say real. I don't know what I want to say there.
And I think what you're saying too, so this is we've talked about Halloween, we've talked about haunts, and we can talk about horror now too. I think what you're saying too, Brandon, is that it lends some evidential value towards the Christian faith, and even persuasive value. And I think this is where maybe it ties in with horror too. Is I've heard some people talk about one of the benefits of horror films and these sorts of things is that sometimes people become convinced that the spiritual is real based on these sorts of films or these sorts of experiences because they claim to be materialists, they claim to be physicalists, and yet they find themselves truly feeling the emotion of fear towards the spiritual realm. A friend of mine talked about how his dad, when he was an atheist, saw The Exorcist, and it helped to convince him that there must be some sort of spiritual dimension to reality, and that gives some sort of persuasive value to not to say that the entire genre of horror is a good thing or something like that. I think personally I would much rather watch just about anything else.
Well, horror
um
succumbs to gratuity in a way that, I don't know, it seems other genres don't necessarily have to. Like the
Sure.
concept of horror from a genre, I think is fine. Like Edgar Allan Poe, for example, that's horror, but it doesn't fall into the gratuitous nature that Saw does, kind of thing.
No, The Telltale Heart was, it brings about a very real understanding of humanity's sinful nature, and that once an act is committed, that guilt doesn't just get wiped away. I mean, Shakespeare did the same kind of thing in Macbeth, right?
Macbeth, yeah.
Oh my goodness. These horror stories that are well done can be very redeeming in that sense of, I don't think it's a genre for everyone, just like I don't think rom-com is a genre for everyone. Some people just don't like it or don't want to go there. But I think you're right. I think more recently horror is more gratuitous. You think horror and you would associate it with something like a slasher film or something like that, rather than I think a recent well done horror was The Quiet Place. I thought that was a well done horror series. Yeah.
Or even
with a brave dad who sacrifices himself for his family.
Yeah.
Or even films like, I believe it was Nefarious that came out recently that was made by Christians, and part of the film is simply to convince people that the spiritual exists and to demonstrate the reality of the spiritual, and it's not gratuitous and the gore and things like that. It's just more of a psychological horror film.
Some well done horror even I think demonstrates the reality of a world stripped of God. You guys are familiar with Brian Godawa. I think his work is really helpful in this area. Is spelled Godawa, but he's a film writer. He is a Christian. And he has actually written at length about this genre and some different things involved in it. But he kind of talks about the fact that some of these films reveal like the reality of a world that is stripped of God. That is like, what is the result of a purely atheistic worldview? Well, this type of thing. Like he talks about zombie films and zombie shows, like, I don't know, like The Walking Dead. That one's pretty gratuitous in terms of its violence and things. But the idea
Scott Klusendorf loves it.
What Scott loves about it is that it's wrestling with this concept of what it means to be human. And in that, how is that humanity displayed? Are you going to sacrifice so that others may survive, or are you going to just forego the rest so that you can live? Like it's a dog eat dog world. So that question is in there. So again, undercurrents of very Christian concepts.
And I think the genre of horror lends itself to depicting this evil and sin, that this, how do I want to say it? Its nature, that it's crouching at the door waiting to devour you. Like is depicted in the story of Cain and Abel. Its desire is for you, and it wants to consume you and destroy you. And so it creates that clean contrast where other genres, especially in our day, every villain is just a misunderstood figure that's had a bad thing happen to them, right? And so it's like it blurs this. Evil doesn't really exist. It's just good people that have been corrupted by bad societies and institutions, kind of thing. This, postmodern notion of evil. And horror kind of just depicts evil in a very true, in that true sense of it is real. Its desire is to destroy you. And there's nothing, there's just that pure evil kind of exists. And it's just not a misunderstood person that, made a bad decision a long time ago kind of thing or whatever.
My brother is actually a Hollywood film director. And, can you guys still see me, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay. My that's good. As long as you guys can see me, we're good. My computer just did the thing where it turns off for the night. But I guess I'm still here, so I can't see you anymore. But we're here.
We got you.
Okay, yeah. So my brother, that's pretty much his argument, is that from sort of an insider perspective, he would say that, and he would also argue that there's a new wave within the horror genre that's a lot more subtle and thoughtful, like anything, a lot of things post M. Night Shyamalan that are kind of more like dramas, but with scary elements and not like Saw.
Yeah.
But he would say that this is like the one genre left in Hollywood where you're allowed to deal with spiritual matters in a direct way. And so he made a movie called Night Swim that's kind of similar to A Quiet Place in a lot of ways, that it has basically a dad having to face evil, face his own demons, and then basically end up doing something sacrificial to protect his family from that evil. And so it's interesting because it's like, part of me is like, I don't know what percentage of your content diet should be the horror genre,
right?
On one hand, but on the other hand, I totally see his point where what other genre can you talk about the spiritual realm in Hollywood, like from the biggest stage possible. So it's interesting.
And not
so
only
this
that,
is the call to young Christian artists to be pioneers in the horror genre.
Not only the spiritual realm, but there has to be a moral element to the story or it won't sell. So there's that too.
Yeah. And speaking of which, apparently a Biola grad produced The Haunting of Emily Rose. So I looked this up, Donnie, and that is correct. Scott Derrickson directed it. So
Brian Godawa is also a Biola grad.
Wow. Biola Film School. That's seems like it's a good one right there. Well, we got a couple more questions coming in, and I've got some that were submitted beforehand. So I'd love to turn to some of those. And again, if you have a question that you'd like us to address, please go ahead and put that in the comments. I think this one, maybe we've addressed a good bit of it, so maybe we can address it quickly. Just, is Halloween a good time to acknowledge that people are trapped in pagan practices like that of the occult? And I'll just kick this off by saying yes. I think this is a good time for us to reflect on this fact and to bring it up and to discuss it and to remember that actually people have sort of given themselves over to these sorts of things. And I think sometimes we don't want to think about that. We don't want to acknowledge that. We want to just keep that kind of in the background. But actually to even pray for people that are in those situations and to bring them to the Lord and to ask for opportunities to speak to them, to bring them to the Lord, I think is actually important.
Yeah. And to bring the hope that which they feel the oppression of is real, but you are not going to find a deliverance where you're seeking it. It's in Jesus Christ alone.
Yeah. It's good.
Well said. Oh, I fact-checked. My husband fact-checked for me. Brian is not a Biola grad, but he works with Biola closely now. And so grads who come out of it. So my bad.
Gotcha. Also, Zach King, I think, is also a Biola grad who does the special effects and stuff on Instagram and YouTube and stuff. He's pretty cool. Not horror at all. Just fun. Very uplifting. There's a question here that was pre-submitted. Is it wrong as a Christian to scare people intentionally on Halloween?
Oh, heck no. I do that as often as I can, starting with my kids.
Oh, man. Wow.
Now, I guess let's be mature about this. It depends on the nature of what you're trying to do here. If you're just being a punk and you delight in scaring people and there's nothing playful and friendly about it, then you're just having a good time at someone else's expense. But pranking and scare pranks, those things are great. You got to be open to it. You can't be somebody that always dishes it out and then gets mad when someone does it to you. But
yeah, I think you're right.
fun.
Like, I think I think the context matters, right? If you're going to people who are not expecting it or are not in the situation, and you're, scaring the living daylights out of them, like, I think that's probably not the best practice. But
Or if this
if
is a
somebody's
Holland boy asking me for permission to scare their mom, which is like the easiest thing to do ever because she's easily scared, I'm not going to give you permission to do that, Andrew or Joshua.
yes, this did come from Andrew, so
Oh, yes.
you nailed it.
That's
Great
great.
job. Yeah, no, and I do think, though, for people who have put themselves in the situation where they're going to houses, they're trick-or-treating or something like that, to have something that, where you go boo or something like that. I don't know. You're not trying to harm them, and it's what are the intentions, and to what degree are we talking about here, I think is good questions.
And maybe I'm overdoing this, but there's something so fun to me about scaring my kids. And like the reality of you just got horrified by what was in your closet, but it's just your dad. That's the home you live in. You
Mm,
don't have any
mm,
reason to be afraid. I think
mm,
that's like the fun, playful, piece to that, at least in my home, and
mm.
kind of more broadly with the spirit in which you're scaring your friends, even where it's
Yeah.
like,
I'll add just one more caveat to that, though, that if somebody has explicitly asked you not to do it,
Mm.
then it's wrong to do it. And I had a friend that used to scare me, and I was like, look, this really bothers me, don't do it anymore.
that's,
And they kept doing it. I was like,
yeah,
wow,
yeah.
great, thanks.
Yeah. No, there's a way you can overdo it and really exploit something like this. So, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really good point. Megan, you were about to say something.
It's not. I will laugh. I think if once I get over the terror when people do it to me, but my empathy is crippling. I can't do it to people.
Mm. That's fair. That's fair. It's good. Are you dressing up for Halloween? If yes, who are you being?
It's a good question. I do have my
I
Obi-Wan
am.
Kenobi Jedi Knight,
Obi-Wan Kenobi. Okay. Nice.
but
Uh-huh.
we've got this idea. This is too long of a story to tell, but we have a fictional character that the Sherards have made up. His name is Hobie Obi Jobi. It's a hilarious story how we got that. So we thought about having two people go as Hobie Obi Jobi and his friend Obi-Wan Kenobi. Just so when you introduce who you are, you have to say all of that.
That's pretty great. I like that.
Great.
Our students do like a fall festival type of thing. And so Tripp's right here. I was going to say, come here, because he's the birthday boy and he can just say hi. But his hair is grown out to the point where he's definitely dressing up as the Dread Pirate Roberts from The Princess Bride, which makes me have to be Princess Buttercup. So
Oh, wow.
that's how
That's
it's going to
awesome.
go.
Very cool. Oh, that's great. Look at that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining for a minute here, Trip. What is
Sure.
it like for you to have your birthday on Halloween?
You mean what is it like for Halloween to be on my birthday?
Yeah, sorry. That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
It's always been a whole heck of a lot of fun. Megan probably told you that. I mean, I grew up thinking that it was for me, and so
That explains so
I
much.
still claim that it is all for me. People dressing up, and I used to love to dress up throughout the year, but everyone else joined me in that, in that fun
Mm-hmm.
on my birthday. And then I loved candy, and so I got to share that experience with the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different kind of pagan origins.
That's great. That's great. Wow. That's awesome. Well, I'll be going to, I think, a church party that some of my friends are hosting, and I'll be dressing up as an Apple Store employee, which is very on brand because I was an Apple Store employee back in the day. So
Nice.
I'll just be wearing my old uniform. So
Peter Crave says that the pagan origins of Apple are apparent in its logo.
that's not true.
The satanic origin.
It's about Isaac Newton and his idea. The original logo was Isaac Newton sitting under a tree.
We got an
I'm
Apple
teasing you.
apologist
I'm
over
teasing.
here.
Yeah, we do. It's great. Well, do you guys have, just before we close here, do you guys have any final thoughts? Do you think we've sort of summed it up in one easy statement here to answer all of these questions
Well, if
at
I
this
were to put
point?
some summative, if I were to do anything summative, it would be the nature of reality is such that it consists of the spiritual and the material. Jesus Christ is the Lord of all. He has conquered the powers of darkness, and in him we have eternal, abundant life. And he has transferred us from the realm of darkness into his marvelous light. And so on a holiday such as Halloween, there's great cause for Christians to celebrate. And I think that Christians that are going to participate in Halloween need to be mindful about this. And if you just get swept up into the cultural currents here, you're going to be participating in something that is unhealthy, pagan in nature, and you ought to be very aware of this. But I do think it is something that you can participate in. I think there's a redemptive element, and I think this can be a holiday moving forward in our country that can be very illuminating on what is true, evangelistic, if you even want to use that phrase.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, I was kind of joking that you would be able to do it, but you actually did a great job. That was incredible, Mike, as a summary of everything we talked about tonight. So well done on that. That's great. Before I want to give Brandon a bit of a shout out here, but does anybody, and Brandon, does anybody have anything else you want to say to conclude tonight?
No,
Okay,
I
great.
liked the charitable piece. That was it. So what Mike said, and then just people wanting to be thoughtful in their responses and charitable to one another, that they've been thoughtful in their responses. And so as Christians, we move forward. And I love Brandon's points about being subversive in the culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I really do, think you've added so much to our conversation tonight, Brandon, and you have brought some great wisdom to us. So tell us a little bit about just your YouTube channel as well as the Wisdom Society before we conclude here.
Oh, well, the let me do the Wisdom Society first, just because I had already mentioned it in this book. I am loving it because we're reading books like this one that I already mentioned by Justin Brierley. And
what is it?
The surprising rebirth.
What is the Wisdom Society?
Oh, okay.
So it has a lot of different elements to it, but my favorite part is the book club, where we'll read a book like this one, but then we'll have the author of the book join us at the end of the time of reading in a Q&A. Kind of like it actually reminds me so much of this, but there'll be 20 or 30 other people on the call. But we'll basically be like, hey, what did you mean on page 33 when you said this? And in particular, last month we had Dr. Stephen Meyer, which was so cool because he is so brilliant. And so we were able to just, over the course of, 5 weeks, we were reading the book together, and we were, different questions are coming out, and maybe less than half of the questions I'm like, oh, he means this, I have the answer. And then the other more than half, I'm like, actually, that's a bit above my pay grade. I don't know how the protein fold mathematically, but let's ask Dr. Meyer. And so it's a great crutch for me to be able to say any questions that I don't know, write that down, and we're bringing the author here in a few weeks, and you should ask that question.
That's cool.
It's a cool way to kind of deepen the reading experience. And then there's other, we have a weekly meeting where we basically do a Bible study. People are sharing prayer requests, and it's just it's a way of, there's probably a lot of other things like it, but it's a growing global community of believers who are all kind of on the same quest for truth and knowing how to learn it and then use it in the different cultures that we all represent. The multicultural component of it is very cool. Me just sitting there and hearing a story from a legendary, 70-year-old Afrikaans speaking South African guy who's telling me all about what's going on there. And you're just like, this is so cool. I how, this is all. And then another person sharing about Spain, and you get that global access to what the church is thinking through, and culture and all these things that I'm really personally appreciating. And the whole idea was I think that we kind of need that in some sense to get out of our vantage point and to start thinking about things in a little bit broader way. So anyways, I'm loving that. That's the Wisdom Society. And that's just an outgrowth of me being how do I better connect with the people that I'm getting to know through the YouTube channel who are emailing me? And at one point I made the mistake of being if you have any questions, just email me at my personal email. And then it's that just became a full-time job. I need to find a better way of facilitating conversation and basically going deeper with the people who want to, answering questions with the people who actually care, but in a manner that's a little bit community led also, where I'm able to kind of like let, in a sense, the body of Christ be the body of Christ, rather than it be, as I always tell them, they're like the Brandon show. It ain't the Brandon show. I'm just one guy here hosting and facilitating a conversation that I know is going to be better if it's us all engaging in it than just me lecturing y'all. So that's kind of how the two pieces, Wisdom Society and the YouTube channel, connect.
Fantastic. Where can they go
Very
to find
cool.
out more about that?
Oh, on youtube.com, the channel is called Daily Dose of Wisdom. And then I think that the Wisdom Society, if you are on YouTube and you click like the little things they have in the description, I think it's like the first thing in the description, or I think it might even be the wisdomsociety.co will take you there, I think. But yeah, it's probably easiest to get there through YouTube because you get the little like explanation of what it is. Like,
and that way you can like click subscribe and hit the bell for notifications on while you're there on the page.
It's actually so funny how few people, I think it's like 15% of people who watch regularly are subscribed. So I'm like, and I don't think that telling people to do it really helps, because I've like talked about it. I think people are like, we know what you want us to do. Stop telling us. I don't know. Maybe it does, but like if you want to, you can. If you don't want to, keep watching.
I don't know if I agree with that, because I tell people to subscribe to my YouTube channel every chance I get, and it hasn't worked. But
and it makes
maybe
people
will
love
someday.
you very much.
Yeah,
nobody gets annoyed with that at all, Matthew.
Absolutely. Exactly.
So, hey, it says we're talking about all that kind of stuff. That we did that pro-life Amendment 4 video with Tony Dungy. Got released today. We're at 600,000 views. So if you haven't seen it, go see it and share it. And that's not just some kind of let's get our views up. People are changing their mind in Florida on this amendment that, again, if passed, will mean that abortion is unrestricted and on demand in Florida. But when people are learning the truth about this amendment, and that's what that video with Tony Dungy, Super Bowl winning coach, does, people are changing their minds. So we need as many people as possible to see a video like this and the other videos we created at apologetics.org/pro-life. So if you haven't seen it, watch it. It's great. Share it. We need to make everybody in the country see this thing and win a victory here in Florida.
Great. Well said. Megan, do you have anything you'd like to promote, or are we good?
Not yet.
You're on board with what Mike said, and so am I. So that's great.
Yeah. Subscribe to their YouTube channels.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Great. Well, it's been wonderful to join you all tonight. And remember, this is a monthly live stream that we do with Apologetics Inc. And so be sure to follow our socials and subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to be informed about when this is happening again. We do different topics, and we're starting to do more with more guests as well. And we just want this to be a space where you can ask your questions, where you can participate, and where we can all grow together. So thank you so much for joining.